A poor girl was forced by her stepmother to marry a CEO. Unexpectedly, after one night, the CEO became addicted to her. Hi, my close-knit family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Oh, how I've missed you all. Every time I sit down to share a story, I feel like I'm wrapping my beautiful family in a warm embrace. Before we begin, let's take a moment for a beautiful prayer. May love and light surround every single one of you. May your hearts be filled with joy, your worries be lifted, and your dreams be blessed beyond measure. And may our stories continue to bring us closer, binding us as one loving family. Now, my precious ones, I have some questions for you. Are you enjoying my stories? How would you rate them from 1 to 10? And tell me which type of story makes your heart race the most? The passionate, intense romance, the soul-stirring drama, or maybe something else. Also, I see so many new faces joining our family. If you're new here, don't be shy. Drop your name and the city you're from in the comments. Let's welcome you with the love and warmth that makes this family so special. And tell me, my darlings, how was the last story? Did it touch your soul? Did it make your heart feel something real? I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Now get cozy, my loves, because today's story is about to take you on an unforgettable journey. The rain fell in steady sheets against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Vaughan estate, turning the manicured gardens into a blur of muted greens and greys. Jalisa Vaughan stood at her bedroom window, one hand pressed against the cool glass, watching droplets trace elaborate patterns downward. At 18, her reflection showed a striking young woman with warm brown skin, high cheekbones, and eyes that held both wisdom and pain beyond her years. Those eyes had seen too much, learned too early how cruel the world could be to a girl who'd lost her mother too soon. The setting sun cast long shadows across her face, highlighting the delicate features she'd inherited from her late mother, features that her stepmother Victoria Rothschild never failed to remind her were common despite their appeal. The sounds of Victoria's expensive Louboutin heels clicking on the marble floors downstairs made Jalisa's shoulders tense. Each sharp click was like a countdown to something inevitable, something she couldn't quite name but felt in her bones. She'd learned to read the different rhythms of Victoria's walks over the years, the slow, measured pace when she was plotting, the quick, aggressive staccato when she was angry, and this current pattern, the sound of victory approaching. Life hadn't been kind to Jalisa since losing her mother at age 8. The memory of that day remained sharp enough to draw blood, the smell of antiseptic in the hospital corridor, the doctor's gentle voice explaining that her mother hadn't survived the surgery, the way her father's hand had gone slack in hers when he heard the news. Grace Vaughan had been a beacon of warmth and love in their lives, a pediatric nurse whose smile could calm the most frightened child, whose touch could ease the most stubborn fever. The official story was that Grace had died of complications from pneumonia, but Jalisa knew better. Her mother had stayed late at the hospital during a severe winter storm, refusing to leave her young patients when replacement staff couldn't make it in. She'd worked 36 hours straight, making sure every child was stable before finally heading home. The car accident that took her life was blamed on the icy roads, but Jalisa knew the truth. Exhaustion had taken her mother's reflexes. Her dedication to others had stolen her away. James Vaughan, her father and CEO of Vaughan Tech Solutions, had fallen apart in the aftermath. A man who'd once been full of laughter and silly jokes became a ghost in his own home, buried in work and grief. Jalisa still remembered the night she'd found him in his study, surrounded by empty whiskey glasses, clutching one of Grace's sweaters and sobbing. Victoria Rothschild had swept into their lives like a perfectly timed storm. She'd been hired as Vaughan Tech's new marketing director, and within months she'd positioned herself as James's support system, his confidant, his savior. Jalisa, at 9 years old, had watched in helpless silence as Victoria orchestrated what she would later recognize as a masterclass in manipulation. "Your father needs someone to take care of him," Victoria had said, kneeling down to Jalisa's level the day before the wedding. "And you, dear girl, need a mother's guidance." That guidance had turned out to be a decade of subtle cruelty and calculated manipulation. Victoria was an artist when it came to maintaining appearances. To the outside world, she was the perfect stepmother, gracious, elegant, and seemingly devoted to her new family. She hosted charity events, joined the right boards, and never failed to mention her beloved stepdaughter in interviews. Behind closed doors, Victoria wielded words like weapons. She'd systematically dismantled Jalisa's self-worth with the precision of a surgeon. "Oh, darling," she would say, examining Jalisa's report card full of A's. "Academic achievement can only take someone like you so far. Best to focus on more attainable goals." Or, "That dress would be lovely on someone with a different complexion. Perhaps we should stick to more forgiving styles." The worst part was how she'd isolated James from his daughter. Every attempt Jalisa made to connect with her father was subtly undermined. Family dinners became exercises in tension, with Victoria directing the conversation away from any meaningful interaction between father and daughter. "James, darling," she would interject whenever Jalisa tried to discuss her dreams of college. "You remember that board meeting tomorrow? You should really review those documents tonight." Now, watching the rain transform the world outside her window, Jalisa felt that familiar ache in her chest, the longing for her mother's warm embrace, for her father's old smile, for a life unburdened by Victoria's elegant tyranny. She pressed her forehead against the glass, closing her eyes against tears that threatened to fall. The sound of car tires on wet gravel snapped her attention back to the present. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce Ghost was making its way up the circular driveway, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Jalisa's heart rate accelerated as she recognized the Montgomery Industries logo on the license plate. "Jalisa!" Victoria's voice carried up the grand staircase, honeyed with false warmth. "Come down to the formal sitting room, darling, and do wear that navy dress I bought you, the one that makes you look presentable." Her fingers trembled slightly as she changed into the dress, a conservative piece that Victoria had deemed appropriate for someone of her background. The fabric felt like a straight jacket against her skin, but she'd learned long ago to pick her battles. As she fastened the pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother, one of the few pieces Victoria hadn't managed to misplace over the years, Jalisa caught her reflection in the full-length mirror. The young woman staring back at her was a study in contained grace. Her mother's features had matured into a beauty that even Victoria couldn't deny, though she tried her best to minimize it with unflattering clothes and subtle criticisms. Jalisa's hair, worn in elegant shoulder-length twists, framed a face that held echoes of Grace's gentle strength. The clicking of heels grew more insistent. "Jalisa! Our guests are waiting!" Taking a deep breath, Jalisa descended the curved staircase, each step measured and careful. The formal sitting room doors stood open, revealing a tableau that would change her life forever. Her father sat in his favorite leather armchair, but he might as well have been carved from stone. Victoria perched on the arm of his chair, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder, her red lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And there, commanding attention from the center of the room, stood Harrison Montgomery Sr., the 72-year-old patriarch of Montgomery Industries. His steel-gray hair and impeccable suit spoke of old money and older power. He turned as Jalisa entered, his sharp eyes assessing her with the same calculation he likely used to evaluate business acquisitions. "Ah," he said, his aged voice carrying easily across the antique furniture and Persian rugs. "So this is the girl." Victoria's smile widened. "Isn't she lovely?" We've worked so hard to polish her into something suitable. Jalisa felt her cheeks burn at the casual degradation, but she kept her spine straight, her expression neutral. Years of Victoria's guidance had taught her to wear dignity like armor. Indeed, Harrison said, taking a measured sip from his crystal tumbler. $60,000, he continued, the words falling like stones in the quiet room. A fair price for a marriage to my son, wouldn't you agree, James? The world tilted sideways. Jalisa's fingers gripped the doorframe, though she managed to keep her face composed. Marriage. Price. The words bounced around her mind like shrapnel, but their meaning refused to take solid form. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand tightened on his shoulder as he nodded. A generous offer, Mr. Montgomery. No, Jalisa whispered, but no one seemed to hear. Or if they did, they didn't care. The rain continued its steady pattern against the windows, nature's accompaniment to the sound of her world crumbling. Harrison set his glass down with a decisive click. The arrangements will be handled discreetly, of course. The marriage license has already been prepared. We'll have the ceremony at the courthouse tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. The word escaped before Jalisa could stop it. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her, Harrison's calculating, Victoria's warning, and her father's empty. Is there a problem? Harrison's tone suggested that problems were things that happened to other people, never to him. Victoria stood, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. Of course not, Mr. Montgomery. Jalisa understands what an honor this is, don't you, dear? The Montgomery name, the stability it will provide. Her fingers wrapped around Jalisa's arm, nails digging in slightly. After all, what other prospects could someone like you hope for? The last fragments of Jalisa's childhood shattered in that moment. She looked at her father, silently begging him to be the man he'd been when her mother was alive, the father who'd sworn to protect her always. But James Vaughan stared into his whiskey glass as if it held answers to questions he'd never dared to ask. Excellent, Harrison said, rising. The car will collect her at 9 tomorrow morning. James, the transfer will be completed once the ceremony is done. He paused at the door, giving Jalisa one final appraising look. Welcome to the Montgomery family, my dear. Do try not to disappoint us. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house like a judge's gavel. Victoria's grip on Jalisa's arm relaxed, but her smile grew sharper. Well, darling, it seems dreams do come true, even for girls like you. Jalisa pulled away, her voice barely a whisper. Daddy, please. But James was already standing, moving toward his study with the mechanical motions of a man sleepwalking through his own life. The study door closed behind him with a soft click that held all the finality of a tomb being sealed. Victoria's laugh was light, musical, and utterly cruel. Oh, my dear girl, did you really think he would choose you over peace, over me? You've been a burden since your mother died, a constant reminder of his greatest loss. At least now you'll be a profitable one. Jalisa made it back to her room before the tears came. She sank to the floor, her back against the door, the navy dress pooling around her like spilled ink. Outside, the rain continued its relentless descent, washing away the last colors of sunset and leaving only darkness behind. In 8 hours, she would be a Montgomery. In 8 hours, her life would be sold for $60,000. In 8 hours, she would learn whether this was truly the end of her story, or perhaps, though she dared not hope it, the beginning of something entirely unexpected. The price of innocence, it seemed, could be measured in dollars and cents. But the cost of survival, that would be calculated in tears, in silence, and in the fierce determination that burned beneath her grief. Tomorrow would come, bringing with it a new name and a new cage. But tonight, Jalisa Vaughan allowed herself one last moment of freedom, one last cry for the girl she'd been, and one last prayer for the woman she would need to become. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Groom. The courthouse's fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over Jalisa's skin as she sat alone on a wooden bench outside courtroom B. The morning had passed in a blur of mechanical motions, being ushered into Victoria's silver Mercedes at precisely 9, watching raindrops chase each other across the window during the silent drive downtown, following a court clerk's efficient footsteps through echoing marble halls. Now she sat, hands folded in her lap, wearing the simple white dress Victoria had thrust at her that morning. Nothing too presumptuous, her stepmother had sneered, smoothing the cotton fabric with critical fingers. We wouldn't want anyone thinking you're trying too hard to appear above your station. The dress felt more like a prison uniform than wedding attire, its stark whiteness a mockery of traditional bridal dreams. Jalisa's mother had kept her own wedding dress preserved in the attic, an elegant creation of lace and pearls that had once promised love and possibility. That dress, like so many precious things, had disappeared shortly after Victoria moved in. The sound of approaching footsteps made Jalisa's shoulders tense. But instead of Victoria's sharp heels or Harrison Sr.'s measured stride, these steps were quick and light. A young court clerk appeared, her face sympathetic as she took in Jalisa's solitary figure. "The judge will be ready in about 20 minutes, she said softly. "Would you like some water?" Jalisa managed a small shake of her head. Her throat felt too tight for water, too tight for air. The reality of what was about to happen pressed against her chest like a weight. She hadn't even seen a photo of Harrison Montgomery Jr., her intended husband. Victoria had been deliberately vague about him, offering only cutting remarks about how Jalisa should be grateful, a girl like her marrying into the Montgomery family. It was more than she deserved. The questions that had kept her awake all night tumbled through her mind again. How old was he? What kind of man would agree to this arrangement? Would he be cruel like his father, seeing her as nothing more than a purchased commodity, or worse, would he be weak like her own father, unable to stand against the tide of manipulation and control? The click of heels against marble announced Victoria's arrival. She swept around the corner like a perfectly coiffed storm, James trailing in her wake like a shadow. Harrison Montgomery Sr. followed, his presence commanding attention even in the mundane setting of a courthouse hallway. "Well," Victoria said, her voice carrying just enough to draw curious glances from passing courthouse staff. "Isn't this exciting, darling? A Montgomery wedding. Who would have thought?" The emphasis she placed on Montgomery made it clear she found the whole situation both amusing and slightly distasteful. Jalisa kept her eyes fixed on her hands, noting distantly that her mother's delicate gold ring, the only piece of jewelry she'd been allowed to wear today, caught the fluorescent light like a trapped star. "The papers are ready," Harrison Sr. announced, his tone suggesting he was concluding a business merger rather than arranging his son's marriage. "We're just waiting on Patrick to arrive." Patrick. So that was his name. Jalisa turned it over in her mind, trying to form a picture of the man who would soon be her husband. The name felt solid, traditional, a name that belonged in oak-paneled boardrooms and private club lounges. More footsteps echoed through the corridor, these ones different, strong, purposeful, but unhurried. Jalisa kept her eyes down, counting the squares in the courthouse's linoleum floor. 1, 2, 3. "Patrick," Harrison Sr.'s voice carried a note of warning. "You're nearly late. Traffic was unavoidable, Father. Though I suspect you knew that when you arranged this morning's timing." The voice that answered Harrison Sr. was nothing like Jalisa had imagined, deep but gentle, with an undertone of steel that suggested its owner was used to standing his ground. Despite herself, she looked up. Patrick Harrison Montgomery stood 6'2", with broad shoulders and the kind of face that belonged in fashion magazines rather than merger announcements. At 33, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd earned his success rather than inherited it. His steel-grey eyes, so like his father's in colour but utterly different in warmth, widened slightly as they took her in. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that somehow managed to look both expensive and understated. His dark hair was styled professionally, but not severely, and a slight shadow of stubble along his jaw suggested he'd been too preoccupied or too rebellious to achieve his father's standard of clean-shaven perfection. "I'm Patrick," he said softly, moving to stand before her. His voice was pitched low, meant only for her ears. "And you must be Jalisa." The gentle way he said her name, not rushing through it like the courthouse staff, not dripping it with disdain like Victoria, made something in Jalisa's chest tighten. She managed a small nod, acutely aware of Victoria's sharp eyes watching their interaction. "The judge is ready for you now," the clerk announced, appearing in the courtroom doorway. "If you'll all follow me." What followed was a ceremony that felt more like a business transaction than a wedding. The judge, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, barely glanced up from the papers as she read the standard vows. Victoria stood at James's side, her hand resting possessively on his arm as if to prevent him from any last-minute attacks of paternal conscience. Harrison Sr. watched the proceedings with the satisfied air of a man seeing a long-term investment finally pay off. But Patrick was different. When it came time to say, "I do," he turned to face Jalisa fully, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made the fluorescent lights dim and the mechanical words take on unexpected weight. His hand, when he took hers to slip on the simple gold band Harrison Sr. had provided, was warm and steady. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York," the judge intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." There was no "you may kiss the bride," no rice, no flowers, no celebration, just Harrison Sr., immediately turning to James with papers requiring signatures, and Victoria's satisfied smirk as she watched another piece of her stepdaughter's life fall under someone else's control. "Mrs. Montgomery," Patrick said quietly, still holding her hand. The title should have felt like another shackle, but something in his voice made it sound almost like a question or perhaps a promise. "The car is waiting," Harrison Sr. announced, having concluded his business with James. "Patrick, you'll take Jalisa to the estate. I have meetings this afternoon, but I trust you can handle the transition." Victoria stepped forward, her smile razor-sharp. "Of course you'll want to get your new bride settled in. Jalisa, darling, do try to remember everything I taught you about being a proper wife. Though I suppose the Montgomerys have their own standards." The slight emphasis she placed on standards made her meaning clear. Whatever those standards were, Victoria doubted Jalisa could meet them. But before Jalisa could feel the familiar sting of her stepmother's words, Patrick's hand tightened slightly around hers. "I'm sure Jalisa will define her own role in our family," he said, his tone pleasant but firm. "Shall we?" This last was directed at Jalisa, accompanied by a slight tug toward the courthouse exit. The walk through the courthouse felt surreal, like moving through water. Patrick's hand remained steady around hers, guiding her past curious onlookers and through the heavy doors into the late morning sun. A sleek black Bentley waited at the curb, a uniformed driver holding the door open. "After you," Patrick said softly, helping her into the car's leather interior. The door closed with a solid thunk, sealing them into a bubble of climate-controlled silence. Moments later, Patrick slid in beside her, and the car pulled smoothly away from the curb. Only then did Jalisa realize she hadn't said goodbye to her father. She turned to look through the rear window, but the courthouse was already disappearing around a corner, taking with it the last fragments of her old life. "Here." Patrick's voice drew her attention back. He was holding out a pristine white handkerchief, monogrammed with his initials, "For the tears you're trying not to shed." The simple kindness in the gesture broke something inside her. Jalisa took the handkerchief, pressing it to her eyes as the first tears fell. She waited for him to sigh in annoyance or make some cutting remark about emotional displays, but Patrick remained quietly present beside her, neither touching her nor pulling away. When she finally regained her composure, the car was crossing the Queensboro Bridge, Manhattan's skyline rising before them like a crystal forest. Patrick's voice, when he spoke again, held none of the awkwardness she'd expected. "I want you to know something," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I had no idea about the arrangement my father made. I found out this morning." Jalisa turned to look at him, studying his profile against the city backdrop. "Then why? Why did I go through with it?" He met her gaze steadily. "Because I knew if I refused, he would have found someone else, someone who might not care about treating you with respect. My father's deals always go through one way or another, at least this way." He trailed off, but Jalisa understood. At least this way she had ended up with someone who seemed to have a conscience, someone who looked at her and saw a person rather than a possession. The car turned onto Fifth Avenue, joining the steady flow of traffic heading uptown. Patrick shifted slightly in his seat, loosening his tie. "I know this isn't what either of us would have chosen, but I want to make something clear. In this marriage, you'll be my equal, not my property. Whatever game my father and your stepmother think they're playing, we don't have to play by their rules." The words were like oxygen after a long time underwater. Jalisa found herself studying him more carefully, the strength in his jaw, yes, but also the kindness around his eyes, the way he held himself like someone used to carrying responsibility rather than wielding power. "The estate is about 20 minutes away," Patrick continued. "It's been in the family for generations, but I've had my own wing renovated recently. You'll have your own suite of rooms there, completely private. No one, not even my father, will enter without your permission." The promise of privacy, of space that would truly be hers, made Jalisa's throat tight again. Even in her father's house, Victoria had felt free to enter her room at will, to rearrange, criticize, and remind Jalisa that nothing really belonged to her. As if reading her thoughts, Patrick added, "The staff answers to me, not my father. They're good people who value discretion. Whatever you need, changes to the rooms, different furniture, new clothes, just ask. Consider it part of making this situation as bearable as possible." The car turned through elaborate iron gates, following a curved driveway through manicured grounds. The Montgomery estate rose before them, a masterpiece of Gothic revival architecture set against the morning sky. To Jalisa's surprise, it didn't feel oppressive despite its grandeur. Something about the way sunlight played across its stone facades and multiple balconies made it seem almost welcoming. "Home, sweet home," Patrick murmured as the car came to a stop. But before the driver could open their door, he turned to face Jalisa fully. "One more thing. I know we're legally married now, but we'll take things at your pace. You're 18, barely starting your life. I won't let this arrangement steal your choices from you." The driver opened the door then, letting in a rush of autumn air that carried the scent of roses from the nearby garden. Patrick stepped out first, then offered his hand to help Jalisa emerge. As she stood beside him, looking up at what would now be her home, she felt something unexpected unfurl in her chest. Not quite hope, perhaps, but the possibility of it. "Would you like to see your rooms?" Patrick asked, offering his arm with old-world courtesy that somehow didn't feel patronizing. "Cook usually serves lunch on the terrace this time of year, if you're hungry. Or we could have something sent up if you'd prefer to settle in privately." Jalisa found her voice at last, surprising herself with its steadiness. "The terrace sounds nice, actually, if that's all right." Patrick's smile was warm and genuine. "More than all right. Shall we? As they climbed the broad stone steps together, Jalisa caught their reflection in one of the estate's many windows. She in her simple white dress, he in his elegant suit, looking for all the world like a normal couple coming home together. Maybe, she thought, this arranged marriage didn't have to be an ending. Maybe, just maybe, it could be the beginning of something unexpected and real. The massive front doors opened silently before them, revealing a soaring entry hall with a sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier. But it was the small details that caught Jalisa's attention. Fresh flowers in crystal vases, comfortable-looking window seats flooded with natural light, books that showed signs of actually being read rather than just displayed. "Welcome home, Mrs. Montgomery," Patrick said softly, and for the first time since hearing that title in the courthouse, Jalisa felt herself begin to smile. Chapter 3. First Light of Love. The Montgomery estate's west wing stretched before Jalisa like a world unto itself. Patrick led her through a series of elegantly appointed rooms, each one more beautiful than the last, until they reached a set of double doors carved with intricate Art Nouveau roses. "Your suite," he said, producing a small golden key. "The only other copy is in the estate's safe, and only you can authorize its use." He handed her the key, careful not to let his fingers brush hers. "Would you like to see inside?" Jalisa turned the key in the lock, feeling the solid weight of real brass and craftsmanship. The doors swung open silently, revealing a space that took her breath away. Afternoon sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a sitting room that managed to be both grand and welcoming. The walls were painted a soft cream, providing a perfect backdrop for artwork that made her heart skip. Contemporary pieces by black artists she recognized from her art history classes, their vibrant colors and powerful themes making the space feel immediately personal. "I had the decorator research artists you might appreciate," Patrick said quietly, noting her reaction. "The collection can be changed, of course, if you prefer different pieces." But Jalisa was already moving deeper into the suite, taking in the details. A writing desk of pale maple sat in one corner, its surface clean but equipped with everything she might need. Comfortable seating areas were arranged to take advantage of both the view and the marble fireplace. Built-in bookshelves lined one wall, their lower shelves already filled with a carefully curated selection that made her pause. Contemporary fiction by diverse authors, art books, and several volumes on business and finance that didn't seem randomly chosen. "I noticed your academic records mentioned an interest in business administration," Patrick explained, following her gaze to the books. "I thought you might want to explore that further." The bedroom beyond the sitting room was a study in understated luxury. A king-sized bed, dressed in soft linens in shades of blue and silver, dominated one wall, while a separate seating area created a peaceful retreat. The ensuite bathroom gleamed with marble and chrome, featuring both a deep soaking tub and a rain shower, but it was the walk-in closet that made Jalisa's steps falter. Unlike the rest of the suite, it was completely empty except for a single note card placed on a central island. "I didn't want to presume," Patrick said, noticing her surprise. "There's a personal shopper on call whenever you're ready to build your wardrobe. Everything will be your choice. Styles, colors, designers. No one else's preferences or restrictions." The deliberate way he said restrictions made it clear he understood exactly how Victoria had used clothing as another form of control. Jalisa's fingers traced the edge of the note card, which contained the shopper's contact, information written in elegant script. "Thank you," she said softly, and meant it for more than just the closet. "Are you hungry?" Patrick asked, giving her space to compose herself. "We could have lunch brought up here if you'd prefer privacy, or—" "The terrace would be nice," Jalisa found herself saying. Something about Patrick's quiet consideration made her want to be brave, to step beyond the safety of these beautiful rooms. He smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face, softening the professional polish into something warmer. The terrace it is, then, though ... He gestured at the late September sunshine. Perhaps a wrap? The breeze can be cool this time of year. Before Jalisa could worry about not having appropriate clothing, Patrick moved to a discreet door she hadn't noticed. It opened to reveal a small selection of designer outerwear. Just basics for now, he said, until you can choose your own. The cashmere wrap she selected was the color of autumn leaves, soft as a whisper against her skin. Patrick led her through the wing's private corridors to a terrace that overlooked the estate's rose gardens. A table had been set for two, white linens bright against the stone balustrade, silver gleaming in the afternoon light. Mr. Patrick, an elderly woman in a housekeeper's uniform, appeared as they approached. Cooks prepared a light lunch menu, the salmon you like, fresh salads, and those little lemon tarts. She turned to Jalisa with a warm smile. Welcome, Mrs. Montgomery. I'm Mrs. Chen. If there's anything you need, day or night, just ring. Patrick held Jalisa's chair, waiting until she was settled before taking his own seat. A server appeared silently with water and a selection of fresh juices, then disappeared just as quietly. I meant what I said about the staff, Patrick said once they were alone. They're loyal to me, not my father. You won't be watched or reported on here. The implication that Harrison Sr. might have expected such surveillance made Jalisa's hands clench in her lap. But before she could dwell on it, their first course arrived, a delicate soup that smelled of fresh herbs and comfort. Tell me about yourself. Patrick's question was gentle, accompanied by a genuine smile. I'd like to know who I'm sharing my life with, beyond what's in the files my father's people compiled. Something in his tone made Jalisa look up sharply. You've seen those files? I insisted, once I learned of the arrangement this morning. I wanted to understand. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I wanted to understand what kind of person would agree to sell their daughter to the Montgomerys. The soup suddenly tasted like ashes in Jalisa's mouth. My father is a broken man who let himself be manipulated by a master, Patrick finished. The files were quite thorough about Victoria Rothschild's methods. The way he said her stepmother's name contained volumes of controlled anger. Jalisa found herself studying him more carefully, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped his silverware just a fraction too tightly. You really didn't know, she asked, about the arrangement? Patrick set down his spoon, meeting her gaze directly. Number Y was in London all last week, closing a deal that will move our clean energy division into European markets. I flew back last night, and this morning my father called me to his study. He presented the whole thing as a fait accompli. The papers ready, the courthouse booked, you already on your way downtown. But you agreed, Jalisa said softly. Why? Because I know my father. Patrick's voice held a lifetime of understanding. If I'd refused, he would have found someone else in our circle to marry you. Someone who would have seen you as property, who would have treated you like... He trailed off, his expression darkening. Like merchandise, Jalisa finished. Purchased and owned. Yes. Patrick's hand moved as if to cover hers, then stopped just short. I couldn't let that happen. Not when I could prevent it. Their main course arrived, perfectly grilled salmon on a bed of seasonal vegetables, the presentation worthy of a fine restaurant. They ate in companionable silence for a few moments, each processing the morning's events. You asked about me, Jalisa said finally. What would you like to know? Patrick's smile returned, warming his grey eyes. Everything. Your dreams, your fears, your favorite books. What makes you laugh? What makes you angry? Who you are when no one's watching? The simple honesty in his voice made something in Jalisa's chest ache. How long had it been since anyone had genuinely wanted to know her? Since Victoria's arrival, she'd been trained to be invisible, to take up as little space as possible in her own life. "I love art," she found herself saying. "Not just looking at it, but understanding it, the history, the context, the way it reflects and shapes culture. And I'm good at math, even though Victoria said it wasn't ladylike to show it. I used to help the other students in calculus class explaining concepts the teacher couldn't quite get across." A teacher at heart, Patrick noted. And the business administration interests? "I want to understand how things work," Jalisa admitted. "Not just numbers, but systems, organizations. How to make them better, more efficient, more human." Patrick's expression showed genuine interest. "We could use more of that perspective at Montgomery Industries. Too often, efficiency comes at the cost of humanity." Their conversation flowed easily through the rest of lunch, touching on books they'd both loved, places they hoped to visit, causes they believed in. Patrick, it turned out, had a dry sense of humor that made Jalisa laugh despite herself. He told stories about his travels that focused on the people he'd met rather than the deals he'd closed, and asked thoughtful questions that showed he was really listening to her answers. As their empty dessert plates were cleared away, Patrick checked his watch. "I have a video conference in 20 minutes. Part of the European deal that can't wait. Would you like to explore the grounds this afternoon? Mrs. Chen can show you the gardens, or you're welcome to discover them on your own. This is your home now. You don't need permission to move through it." The freedom implicit in that statement made Jalisa's throat tight. "I think I'd like to get settled in my rooms first, if that's all right. Maybe look through those books you provided." "Of course." Patrick stood, offering his hand to help her up. "I'll have dinner sent to your suite around 7, unless you'd prefer to dine together." Jalisa thought about it, surprised to find she wasn't automatically choosing the safer option of solitude. "Together would be nice, but in my sitting room, I'm not quite ready for the formal dining room." "Perfect." Patrick's smile was understanding. "I'll bring chocolate cake. I find it helps when processing major life changes." The walk back to her suite was comfortable, filled with Patrick pointing out artwork she might enjoy and explaining which parts of the estate were private versus public spaces. At her doors, he stopped, maintaining a respectful distance. "Jalisa," he said softly. "I know this isn't how either of us imagined starting a marriage, but I want you to know you're safe here, with me. Whatever this becomes, it will be on your terms." She nodded, unable to find words for the complex emotions swirling in her chest. Patrick gave her another warm smile and turned to go. "Patrick?" Her voice stopped him. "Thank you for being unexpected." His laugh was gentle. "I think we're both going to be full of surprises." Alone in her suite, Jalisa moved through the rooms slowly, really taking in the details. Someone, probably Mrs. Chen, had unpacked the small bag she'd brought from home, arranging her few possessions with care. Her mother's photo, the one she kept hidden from Victoria, sat in a new silver frame on the bedside table. The afternoon sun painted patterns on the pale carpet as Jalisa curled up in a window seat with one of the business books, but her mind kept drifting to lunch, to the way Patrick listened as if her thoughts mattered, to the genuine interest in his eyes when she spoke about her dreams. She thought about Victoria's sneering predictions of what marriage to a Montgomery would mean, about Harrison C's cold assessment of her worth in dollars and cents. But Patrick was different. He saw her not as a possession or a problem, but as a person. a partner. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Jalisa found herself looking forward to dinner, to more conversation, to chocolate cake, to discovering who they might become together. This morning, she'd been a bride sold to the highest bidder. Tonight, she was something else, something undefined but full of possibility. The first light of something that felt dangerously like hope began to warm her heart. Perhaps this arranged marriage, this business transaction disguised as a wedding, could become something real, something chosen rather than imposed, something unexpected and beautiful, like roses blooming in winter. Jalisa touched the soft cashmere wrap still draped around her shoulders, remembering Patrick's quiet consideration. Yes, she thought, this could be the beginning of something extraordinary, not because it was forced upon them, but because they might choose it day by day, conversation by conversation, moment by moment. The future stretched before her like an unwritten story, and for the first time since losing her mother, Jalisa felt ready to turn the page. Chapter 4. Breaking Down Walls. Over the next few weeks, Patrick showed Jalisa a world she'd never known existed. It wasn't just the material things, though he did ensure she had everything. She needed to feel comfortable in her new life. It was the way he went about it, the thoughtfulness behind each gesture, the constant respect for her autonomy. The morning after their wedding, a sleek black credit card appeared on her breakfast tray, along with a note in Patrick's precise handwriting, "For whatever you need or want. No limits, no questions asked. This is your home now. Make it yours." But he didn't just hand her money and disappear. When Jalisa mentioned wanting to update her wardrobe, Patrick arranged for several top designers to bring their collections to the estate. He stayed for the first few minutes, making it clear to everyone that Mrs. Montgomery was to be treated with the utmost respect, then left her to make her own choices without hovering or influencing her decisions. "These clothes are armor," he'd said quietly before leaving. "Choose pieces that make you feel strong." The designers had been surprisingly kind, taking time to understand Jalisa's style preferences rather than trying to force their own vision on her. For the first time in years, she was able to select clothes that actually reflected who she was. Elegant but comfortable, professional but youthful, with colors that complemented her skin tone rather than trying to downplay it. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into their marriage, Patrick found her in the estate's library, surrounded by college brochures. He'd paused in the doorway, taking in the scene, then entered quietly and sat in the armchair across from her. "Columbia has an excellent business program," he said, noting the brochure in her hands. "Their focus on ethical leadership is particularly strong." Jalisa had tensed, waiting for the other shoe to drop, but Patrick simply pulled out his phone and started making notes. "I'll have the admissions office send over the full application package. Early decision deadline is November 1st, so we have time to put together a strong application." "Victoria always said college would be a waste," Jalisa found herself saying, "that no amount of education could change certain facts about me." Patrick's expression darkened momentarily. "Victoria Rothschild," he said carefully, "is an expert at destroying dreams to maintain control. But she's wrong. Apply wherever you want, Jalisa. I'll handle the costs." "Your father won't approve," she warned, remembering Harrison Sr.'s comments about a wife's proper place. Patrick's smile held a hint of steel. "My father's approval stopped mattering to me a long time ago. Besides," he added, his tone lightening, "Montgomery Industries could use more executives with actual ethics training. The old guard's idea of corporate responsibility begins and ends with tax-deductible donations to their favorite charities." That conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Jalisa began to see that Patrick wasn't just being kind out of obligation. He genuinely supported her dreams, believed in her potential. He arranged for her to meet with college counselors, helped her craft her personal statement, and never once suggested that being Mrs. Montgomery should be enough. Their evenings fell into a comfortable routine. They would have dinner together in Jalisa's sitting room, talking about their days. Patrick shared stories from board meetings and business deals, always asking her opinion on thorny ethical questions. Jalisa found herself opening up about her own experiences, her hopes for the future, her memories of life before Victoria. One night, over slices of chocolate cake, which had become something of a tradition, Patrick asked about her mother. "You don't have to talk about her if you don't want to," he said quickly, seeing Jalisa's expression. I'd like to know about the woman who raised such an extraordinary daughter." Something in his tone, genuine interest without pity, made Jalisa want to share. "She was a pediatric nurse," she began, "the kind who remembered every patient's favorite color and would sing silly songs during scary procedures. She had this way of making everyone feel safe, even in the worst moments." Patrick listened intently as Jalisa described Grace Vaughan's dedication to her patients, her love of art and music, her habit of dancing in the kitchen while making Sunday breakfast. He asked thoughtful questions that showed he was really hearing her, really wanting to understand. "She sounds remarkable," he said, when Jalisa finally fell silent. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have liked you," Jalisa realized. "She always said you could judge a person's character by how they treat those who can't help them in return." Patrick's smile was soft. "Smart woman. I see where you get it from." Their days settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Patrick never pressured Jalisa for physical intimacy, maintaining careful boundaries while still showing affection in small ways, a gentle touch on her shoulder when passing, a warm smile across the dinner table, thoughtful notes left with morning coffee. The staff, true to Patrick's word, treated Jalisa with genuine respect. Mrs. Chen became something of a surrogate mother figure, always ready with a cup of tea and a sympathetic ear. The gardeners started leaving fresh flowers in Jalisa's suite, choosing blooms that matched her new decor. Even the security team, all ex-military men hired by Harrison Sr., showed their support by quietly keeping Victoria away when she tried to make surprise visits. One rainy Saturday, about a month into their marriage, Patrick took Jalisa shopping at a small boutique in Manhattan, not for clothes or jewelry, but for art supplies. He'd noticed her sketching in the margins of her college applications and decided she needed proper materials. "My father would say it's a waste of time," he commented, as Jalisa selected pencils and pastels. "Which is exactly why you should do it. Art feeds the soul in ways quarterly reports never will." They ended up spending hours in the shop, with Patrick asking interested questions about different techniques and materials. His genuine curiosity made Jalisa feel safe sharing this part of herself, the creative dreams Victoria had dismissed as frivolous. That evening, back at the estate, Patrick helped her set up a small studio space in one corner of her sitting room. He arranged the lighting himself, insisting on proper task lamps that wouldn't strain her eyes. "There," he said, stepping back to admire their work. "A space that's purely yours, for creating whatever you want." Jalisa found herself studying his profile in the warm lamplight. In the weeks since their courthouse wedding, Patrick had become not just her husband, but her friend. Someone who saw her clearly and liked what he saw. Someone who supported her dreams instead of trying to cage them. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for this, but for everything." Patrick turned to face her, his grey eyes serious. "You don't need to thank me for treating you with basic human dignity, Jalisa. That should have been your birthright." "Still," she insisted, "you've made this so much easier than it could have been, than it would have been with someone else." Something shifted in Patrick's expression then, a softening around his eyes, a gentle curve to his lips. He took a step closer, moving slowly enough that Jalisa could have backed away if she wanted to. She didn't want to. Patrick's kiss, when it finally came, was nothing like she'd imagined her first kiss would be. It wasn't awkward or demanding or frightening. It was gentle as a summer breeze, warm as morning sunshine, sweet as the chocolate cake they shared every evening. When he pulled back, his eyes searched her face carefully. Was that okay? Jalisa found herself smiling. More than okay. It wasn't a dramatic moment of passion like in the romance novels she used to hide from Victoria. It was something better, something real and chosen, born of growing trust and genuine affection rather than obligation or possession. That night, after Patrick had bid her good night and returned to his own rooms, Jalisa stood at her window watching the rain fall. Her fingers touched her lips, remembering the gentle pressure of Patrick's kiss. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt truly safe, truly seen. The walls she'd built around her heart, reinforced by years of Victoria's cruelty, were beginning to crumble. Not because Patrick was trying to break them down, but because he made her feel secure enough to lower them herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, college applications to complete, Harrison Seeger's disapproval to navigate, the constant shadow of Victoria's influence to overcome. But tonight, Jalisa allowed herself to imagine a future full of possibility. A future where love wasn't a transaction or a trap, but a choice made freely, day by day, moment by moment. She picked up one of her new sketching pencils, letting her hand move across fresh paper. The face that emerged wasn't young Jalisa hiding from Victoria's sharp words, or the scared bride at the courthouse. It was the woman she was becoming, strong, hopeful, ready to embrace whatever came next. A woman worthy of love. A woman Patrick saw clearly, believed in completely, and chose to kiss not out of duty, but out of genuine desire. Outside, the rain continued its gentle rhythm against the windows. Inside, Jalisa Montgomery smiled and kept drawing, adding touches of light to her self-portrait's eyes. Eyes that no longer held just pain and wisdom, but something new and precious. The first delicate blooms of love growing in the most unexpected garden. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. Their growing happiness couldn't remain untouched forever. The first crack in their peaceful world appeared at the annual Montgomery Industries Charity Gala, 6 weeks into their marriage. Jalisa had been nervous about attending, knowing it would be her first major public appearance as Mrs. Montgomery. Patrick had been characteristically thoughtful about the event. He'd arranged for a top stylist to help Jalisa select the perfect gown, a midnight blue creation that made her feel like a queen. The designer had incorporated subtle African patterns into the beadwork, a detail that brought tears to Jalisa's eyes when she noticed it. "Beautiful," Patrick had said simply when he saw her ready for the gala. The pride in his eyes gave her courage. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered with New York's elite. Diamonds caught the light like stars, champagne flowed freely, and conversation hummed at a perfectly modulated volume. Patrick kept Jalisa close, his hand warm at the small of her back as he introduced her to business associates and society figures. Most people were polite, if reserved. A few were genuinely welcoming, particularly the younger executives who appreciated Patrick's progressive approach to business. But there were also whispers, sidelong glances, barely concealed smirks behind champagne flutes. Victoria's arrival changed the temperature of the room instantly. She swept in on James's arm, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's cars. Her smile, when she spotted Jalisa, was razor-sharp. "Darling," she cooed, air-kissing Jalisa's cheek. "How surprisingly well you clean up, though perhaps a bit overdressed. We wouldn't want anyone thinking you're trying too hard to fit in." Patrick's hand tightened slightly on Jalisa's waist. "Mrs. Vaughn," he said coolly, "I wasn't aware you were on the guest list." Victoria's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Oh, but I'm on all the right lists now, dear boy. Your father has been most accommodating." James stood slightly behind his wife, his eyes fixed on his drink. He barely glanced at Jalisa, though his hands trembled slightly when Victoria mentioned Harrison Sr. Throughout the evening, Victoria worked the room like a master conductor, dropping subtle hints and poisoned words into eager ears. Jalisa tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the meaningful conversations Patrick was having about Montgomery Industries' new charitable initiatives. But then she overheard a conversation near the ladies' room that made her blood freeze. "Well, of course it was arranged," Victoria's voice carried just enough to reach interested parties. The girl practically threw herself at Harrison Sr., batting those eyes and playing on his protective instincts. "Though I suppose we shouldn't be surprised, like mother, like daughter." "What do you mean?" another woman asked eagerly. "Oh, didn't you know? Her mother was quite the social climber herself. How else does a simple nurse end up married to a CEO, though at least Grace had the decency to die before she could spend too much of the family money?" Jalisa's vision blurred with tears. She turned to flee, but found Patrick standing behind her, his face set in lines of cold fury. "Mrs. Vaughan," his voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "A word, if you please." Victoria's smile didn't waver. "Of course, dear. Though I was just sharing some family history, nothing improper about that." "Interesting definition of proper," Patrick said, his tone arctic. "I've had investigators looking into your financial activities for the past month. Would you like to discuss what they found?" The color drained from Victoria's face. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "No?" Patrick's smile was terrifying in its gentleness. "The offshore accounts? The creative accounting at Vaughntech? The systematic embezzlement that began, coincidentally, right after you married James?" The whispers in the crowd took on a different tone. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand clutched her champagne flute so tightly it threatened to shatter. "How dare you?" she hissed. "You have no proof." "I have every proof," Patrick replied calmly. "Every transaction, every hidden account, every penny you've stolen from the man you claim to love. Would you like to see the files? I had them delivered to the SEC this morning." James stepped forward then, his face ashen. "Victoria?" What is he talking about? But Victoria was already backing away, her composure cracking like fine china. "She's nothing but a gold digger," she spat, gesturing at Jalisa, "just like her mother." It was the wrong thing to say. Patrick's voice, when he spoke again, could have frozen flame. "Mrs. Vaughan, your life is about to become very complicated. I suggest you leave now while you still have some dignity intact. And if you ever speak about Jalisa or her mother again, I will personally ensure that every society door in New York slams shut in your face." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Victoria fled, leaving James standing alone and lost. Patrick turned to him with slightly more gentleness. "Mr. Vaughan, I suggest you call your lawyer. You'll want to distance yourself from what's coming." Later that night, in their private sitting room at the estate, Jalisa finally broke down. The tears she'd held back at the gala poured out as Patrick held her close. "How could she?" Jalisa sobbed. "How could she say those things about my mother?" Patrick's arms tightened around her. "Because she's a bitter woman who can't stand to see real love or goodness. Your mother was a nurse who died saving 3 children from a burning building," he whispered. "I found the news articles, talked to people who knew her. She worked extra shifts that winter because the pediatric ward was understaffed. She stayed late that night because 2 of her young patients had fevers that wouldn't break. The car accident happened because she was exhausted from caring for others." He pulled back slightly, cupping Jalisa's face in his hands. "You're exactly like her. Brave, selfless, and absolutely extraordinary." Victoria attacked her memory because she knows she'll never be half the woman your mother was. Jaleesa looked up at him through tear-stained lashes. You investigated my mother. I wanted to know about the woman who raised you, Patrick said softly. I found articles about her work at the hospital, interviews with parents whose children she'd helped, letters from colleagues praising her dedication. She was beloved, Jaleesa. Her funeral was standing room only. Hundreds of people whose lives she'd touched. Fresh tears fell, but these were different, healing tears, washing away years of Victoria's poison. Tell me more, she whispered. Patrick spent the next hour sharing everything he'd learned about Grace Vaughan, how she'd started a program to bring art therapy to sick children, how she'd organized a fund to help families with medical expenses, how she'd met James at a hospital fundraiser where she'd been speaking about pediatric care initiatives. She wasn't a social climber, he said firmly. She was a force for good who happened to fall in love with a man who recognized her worth, just like her daughter. Jaleesa curled closer into his embrace, letting his words and the steady beat of his heart soothe her pain. When did you start the investigation into Victoria? The day after our wedding, Patrick admitted. I knew someone like her wouldn't let go of control easily. I wanted to be prepared when she tried to hurt you again. The protective anger in his voice made Jaleesa's heart swell. This was more than the kindness he'd shown since their arranged marriage. This was fierce, deliberate defense of her happiness. What will happen to her? She asked. The SEC investigation will take time, but the evidence is solid. She'll likely face charges for financial fraud. Your father, Patrick sighed. He'll need support to get through this, but maybe now he can finally break free of her influence. Jaleesa thought about James, standing alone in that glittering ballroom, his world crumbling around him. He let her control him for so long. Grief makes people vulnerable, Patrick said gently. Victoria exploited that vulnerability. But it's not too late for him to find his way back to being the father you remember. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire dance in the hearth. Finally, Jaleesa spoke again. Thank you, not just for defending me, but for defending my mother's memory. Patrick pressed a kiss to her temple. Your mother's legacy lives in you, in your kindness, your strength, your desire to help others. Victoria couldn't destroy that, no matter how hard she tried. That night, as Jaleesa prepared for bed, she looked at her mother's photo on the bedside table. Grace Vaughan smiled back at her, radiating the warmth and love that Victoria had tried to erase from history. You'd like him, Mum, Jaleesa whispered to the picture. He sees me, really sees me, and he's not afraid to fight for what's right. Outside her window, the moon cast silver light over the estate's gardens. Tomorrow would bring challenges, dealing with the fallout from Victoria's exposure, helping James navigate his new reality, facing the society gossips who'd witnessed it all. But tonight, Jaleesa felt stronger than she had in years. Victoria's shadows were finally being banished, pushed back by the light of truth and love. Patrick had given her more than protection. He'd given her back her mother's true story, her own worth, and the promise of a future where love didn't have to hide in shadows. As she drifted off to sleep, Jaleesa smiled, remembering something her mother used to say, "The truth always comes to light, sweetheart, and when it does, it sets us free." Chapter 6. Rise of the Phoenix. Jaleesa threw herself into her studies with renewed determination after Victoria's downfall. The acceptance letter from Columbia's School of Business arrived on a crisp October morning, accompanied by a personal note from the dean praising her application essay on ethical leadership in modern corporations. Patrick had found her crying happy tears in her study, the letter clutched to her chest. Without a word, he'd swept her into a celebratory hug, then immediately called Mrs. Chen to arrange champagne and her favorite chocolate cake. "I knew you could do it," he said later, as they sat in their favorite spot on her private terrace. "The admissions board would have been crazy to pass up someone with your insight and drive." Jalisa traced the Columbia letterhead with trembling fingers. "I still can't quite believe it's real. Victoria always said—" "Victoria," Patrick interrupted gently, "is currently facing federal charges for embezzlement. I think we can safely discount her opinions on anything." The investigation into Victoria's financial dealings had revealed a web of fraud that stretched back years. She had been systematically siphoning money from Vaughan Tech, using sophisticated accounting tricks to hide her theft. The evidence Patrick's investigators had uncovered was damning. James, once the truth about his wife's crimes became clear, had seemed to wake from a long nightmare. He'd filed for divorce immediately and thrown himself into cooperating with the authorities. The process had been painful but cleansing, like lancing an infected wound. Now, 2 months after the gala confrontation, Jalisa was excelling in her business classes at Columbia. Patrick watched with pride as she transformed from a timid girl into a confident young woman. Her natural intelligence, no longer suppressed by Victoria's manipulation, flourished in the academic environment. "I have a surprise for you," Patrick said one evening, joining her in the library where she was working on a case study analysis. "How would you feel about putting some of your business theory into practice?" Jalisa looked up from her textbooks, intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" "Montgomery Industries' charitable foundation needs restructuring," Patrick explained, settling into the chair across from her. "The current model is outdated, too focused on tax benefits and not enough on actual impact. I thought you might want to take a look at it." The trust in his voice made Jalisa's heart swell. "You'd let me do that?" Patrick's smile was warm. "Let you? I'm counting on you. Your perspective is exactly what we need. Someone who understands both business principles and human needs." Over the next few weeks, Jalisa immersed herself in studying the foundation's structure and operations. She collaborated with Patrick's team, conducted interviews with grant recipients, and developed a comprehensive proposal for reform. Her presentation to the Foundation's board, including Harrison Sr., was a triumph of preparation and passion. She stood confidently at the head of the mahogany conference table, her voice clear and strong as she outlined her vision. "The current model treats charity as a business transaction," she explained, clicking through meticulously prepared slides. "But true philanthropy should be about transformation, not just for the recipients, but for the organization itself. I propose restructuring our giving around 3 core principles: sustainability, empowerment, and measurable impact." Harrison Sr., who had initially viewed her involvement with barely concealed skepticism, found himself leaning forward as Jalisa detailed her plans. Her proposal included innovative funding mechanisms, partnerships with grassroots organizations, and a revolutionary approach to measuring social impact. Furthermore, she concluded, by integrating these initiatives with Montgomery Industries' core business strategies, we create a synergy that benefits both our commercial interests and our social mission. It's not just about giving money, it's about investing in sustainable change. The silence that followed her presentation was broken by slow, deliberate applause from Harrison Sr. himself. "Well," he said, his voice carrying a note of surprise and reluctant admiration, "it seems we've underestimated you, Mrs. Montgomery." Patrick, watching from his seat at the table, felt his chest swell with pride. This was the woman he'd glimpsed beneath Victoria's oppression, brilliant, compassionate, and unstoppable once given room to shine. The board approved Jalisa's proposals unanimously. Within months, the Montgomery Foundation became a model for modern corporate philanthropy, earning praise from industry leaders and social impact experts alike. But it was more than just professional success. Jaleesa began to hold her head high in social situations, her natural grace and intelligence shining through. The whispers about her changed from criticism to admiration. Even the society matrons who had once echoed Victoria's sneers found themselves charmed by the young Mrs. Montgomery's genuine warmth and quiet confidence. Patrick found himself falling deeper in love with her every day, not just because of her beauty or intelligence, but because of her resilience, her compassion, and her quiet strength. He loved watching her tackle complex problems, the way her brow furrowed in concentration as she worked through solutions. He loved her determination to use their resources for good, her insistence on looking beyond surface appearances to find true need. One evening, after a particularly successful foundation event, they walked together in the estate's rose garden. The autumn air was crisp, but Patrick had wrapped his jacket around Jaleesa's shoulders, and they lingered among the late-blooming flowers. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Jaleesa asked suddenly. "About why you went through with the marriage?" Patrick nodded, his hand warm against the small of her back. "I said I couldn't let my father arrange a marriage with someone who might not treat you with respect." "You did more than that," Jaleesa said softly. "You gave me back myself. Every time Victoria tried to make me small, you helped me grow. Every dream she called impossible, you made achievable." Patrick stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlight. "You did all the growing yourself, Jaleesa. I just removed the shadows that were blocking your light." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Do you know what I see when I look at our foundation's work? I see my mother's legacy. She taught me that true strength lies in helping others rise. You helped me rise, and now we're helping others do the same." Patrick's kiss was tender, full of pride and love and promise. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "You're extraordinary, Jaleesa Montgomery. Don't ever let anyone tell you differently again." Later that night, as they shared their traditional slice of chocolate cake in Jaleesa's sitting room, Patrick watched his wife review quarterly reports from their newest initiative, a scholarship program for underprivileged students interested in healthcare careers. She had come so far from the frightened girl at the courthouse. Now she moved through the world with quiet confidence, her intelligence and compassion touching everything she did. The business classes at Columbia were just the beginning. Patrick could already see her future role in shaping Montgomery Industries into something more ethical, more human. But more than that, he saw the woman he'd grown to love with his whole heart. Not because of any arrangement or obligation, but because she was exactly who she was meant to be, strong, brilliant, and unstoppable. As if sensing his thoughts, Jaleesa looked up from her reports and smiled. The love in her eyes matched the warmth in his chest, a flame that had grown from the smallest spark into something powerful and transformative. Together, they were building something neither of them had expected, a marriage of true equals, a partnership based on respect and understanding, a love that had bloomed in the most unlikely soil. The phoenix, they say, rises from its own ashes to soar higher than before. Watching his wife shine in her newfound confidence, Patrick thought the metaphor particularly apt. Jaleesa had emerged from the ashes of Victoria's cruelty, stronger and more beautiful than ever. And they were only just beginning. Chapter 7. Truth and Consequences. The evidence against Victoria was damning. In the weeks following her public confrontation at the gala, Patrick's investigators had uncovered layer upon layer of financial fraud. She had been embezzling from James's company for years, using the money to maintain her lavish lifestyle while treating Jaleesa like a servant. The investigation revealed a complex web of hidden accounts and falsified records. Victoria had systematically siphoned funds from Vaughan-Tech's operational accounts, disguising the transactions as legitimate business expenses. She had even created fake vendors and consultants, routing company money through shell corporations that led back to her personal accounts. When the police arrived at the Vaughan estate on a cold November morning, Victoria's perfectly manicured world crumbled. She had been in the middle of berating a maid about improper dusting when the officers appeared, warrant in hand. "This is ridiculous," she had sputtered, her composure cracking as they read her rights. "Do you have any idea who I am?" But her social status couldn't protect her from the weight of evidence. The prosecutors had built an airtight case, supported by years of documentation and testimony from Vaughan-Tech employees who had been silenced by fear of Victoria's influence. James, watching his wife being led away in handcuffs, seemed to age a decade in moments. The realization of how thoroughly she had deceived him, how completely she had manipulated his grief over Grace to gain control of his life and company, hit him like a physical blow. Jaleesa received the news of Victoria's arrest from Patrick, who had insisted on being present when it happened. He found her in her study at Columbia, where she was preparing for finals. "It's over," he said simply, gathering her into his arms as the emotions overwhelmed her. "She can't hurt you anymore." The trial was swift and decisive. Victoria's lawyers attempted to paint her as a misunderstood businesswoman whose aggressive investment strategies had been misconstrued as fraud. But the evidence told a different story, one of calculated deception and systematic theft. The prosecutor's opening statement had been particularly powerful. "This is not a case about aggressive business practices. This is a case about a woman who used grief and manipulation to steal not just money, but years of a young girl's life, who used her position to crush the spirit of her stepdaughter while enriching herself with stolen funds." Victoria's mask of sophistication crumbled completely when the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. The judge, noting her lack of remorse and the calculated nature of her crimes, handed down a lengthy prison sentence. Through it all, Jaleesa maintained her composure, drawing strength from Patrick's steady presence and her own growing confidence. She attended key parts of the trial not out of vindication, but to reclaim her narrative. Victoria had tried to write her story as one of inadequacy and shame. Jaleesa was rewriting it as one of resilience and triumph. James, finally seeing the truth about his wife, was devastated. The man who had once been a dynamic business leader was reduced to a shell of himself, haunted by years of manipulation and missed opportunities with his daughter. When he asked to see Jaleesa after the trial, Patrick was protective. "You don't have to," he told her. "No one would blame you for keeping your distance." But Jaleesa knew she had to face this part of her past, too. She arranged to meet James at a quiet cafe near Central Park, neutral ground where they could talk. Her father looked small somehow, diminished without Victoria's controlling presence. His hands shook slightly as he stirred his untouched coffee. "Jaleesa," he begged when she sat down, "can you ever forgive me?" She studied him carefully, seeing both the broken man before her and echoes of the loving father he'd once been. The man who had read her bedtime stories and taught her to ride a bike. The father who had been stolen from her by grief and Victoria's manipulation. "We can try to build something new," she said finally, reaching across the table to take his trembling hand. "Not what we had before, that's gone. But maybe something honest. Something real." James broke down then, years of suppressed emotions pouring out in a crowded cafe. Jaleesa held his hand as he apologized for his weakness, for letting Victoria control him, for failing to protect his daughter. "I see so much of your mother in you," he said when he could speak again. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become, So proud of how you've overcome everything I let happen to you." That evening, back at the Montgomery estate, Jalisa sat with Patrick in their favorite spot on her terrace. The winter air was cold, but Patrick had arranged for heated lamps and thick blankets, maintaining their tradition of evening conversations under the stars. "How do you feel?" he asked softly, watching her process the emotional day. "Lighter," Jalisa realized. "Like a weight I've carried so long I forgot it was there has finally been lifted." Patrick reached over to take her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Your father?" "He's not the man he was before Mom died," Jalisa said thoughtfully, "but maybe he can become someone new, someone better." That night, Patrick surprised her with something that made her heart stop. He presented her with a diamond ring, not as a replacement for their hasty courthouse wedding band, but as a promise. "Marry me again," he said, his grey eyes intense in the lamplight. "This time exactly the way you want. Not because of arrangements or obligations, but because we choose each other." Jalisa looked at the ring, a stunning piece that somehow managed to be both elegant and unique, just like their love story. "You want to have another wedding?" "I want to stand up in front of everyone we love and tell the world that I choose you," Patrick said firmly. "Not because my father arranged it, not because of business or social obligations, but because you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known." Tears slipped down Jalisa's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to choosing you. Yes to building something real. Yes to everything." The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, catching the light like captured stars. Patrick gathered her close, his kiss tasting of promise and possibility. Later, as they shared their traditional slice of chocolate cake, Jalisa looked around her sitting room, at the art she'd chosen, the books that reflected her interests, the space she'd made truly her own. So much had changed since that rainy day at the courthouse. Victoria would face the consequences of her actions in prison. James was beginning the long journey of redemption and healing. And Jalisa was finally free to be exactly who she was meant to be, loved by a man who saw her true worth. "What are you thinking?" Patrick asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about truth," she said softly. "How it always comes to light eventually. And how sometimes, when the lies fall away, something beautiful can grow in their place." Patrick's smile was tender as he leaned in to kiss her again. "Something beautiful already has." Outside, the winter wind whispered through bare branches, but inside, warmth bloomed like spring. Truth had indeed brought consequences, justice for Victoria's crimes, hope for James's redemption, and for Jalisa and Patrick, the precious chance to transform an arranged marriage into a love story written entirely on their own terms. Chapter 8. Hearts Unleashed. Their honeymoon in the Maldives was everything their courtship should have been. Away from prying eyes and social pressure, Patrick and Jalisa discovered each other anew on a private island where crystal-clear waters met powder-white sand. The resort's overwater villa became their sanctuary, a place where the complicated world of Manhattan society and family obligations felt as distant as the stars that scattered across the night sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed an endless expanse of turquoise ocean, while traditional Maldivian architecture provided a perfect blend of luxury and authenticity. On their first morning, Jalisa woke to find Patrick already on their private deck, arranging breakfast. Fresh tropical fruits, still warm pastries, and the rich aroma of Maldivian coffee created a feast for the senses. "Good morning, Mrs. Montgomery," he said, his smile warm as sunshine on water. "Ready for your first swimming lesson?" Jalisa had confessed during their flight that she'd never learned to swim, another limitation Victoria had imposed, claiming it wasn't necessary for someone like her. Patrick had immediately promised to teach her, understanding that this was about more than just swimming. It was about breaking free from old restrictions, about claiming new experiences as her own. They spent that morning in the shallow waters near their villa, Patrick's hands steady and supportive as he taught her to float. His patience was infinite, his encouragement constant, and his joy in her progress genuine. "That's it," he called, as Jalisa managed her first few independent strokes. "You're a natural." By the end of the first week, she was swimming confidently in the lagoon, discovering the freedom of moving through crystal-clear water. Patrick had arranged for a marine biologist to give them private snorkeling lessons, opening up a whole new world beneath the waves. "Look," he whispered one afternoon, pointing to a sea turtle gliding gracefully past their villa. "She's as elegant as you are." Their days fell into a peaceful rhythm that felt nothing like the structured routines of their early marriage. They explored local islands, learning about Maldivian culture and traditions. Patrick taught Jalisa to scuba dive, watching with pride as she mastered each new skill. They spent hours talking about everything and nothing, building the kind of intimate knowledge of each other that comes only with uninterrupted time and open hearts. One evening, standing on their private beach, Patrick gathered all the resort guests. The setting sun painted the sky in impossible shades of pink and gold, turning the ocean into liquid fire. "I want everyone to know," he announced, his voice carrying over the gentle waves, "that I'm madly in love with my wife, not because of any arrangement or obligation, but because she is the most remarkable person I've ever known." Jalisa felt tears spring to her eyes as Patrick turned to face her fully. "When we met, it was because of other people's schemes. But every day since then, I've chosen you. I choose your strength, your compassion, your incredible heart. I choose your determination to make the world better, your courage in facing down the past, your ability to find joy even after everything you've been through." The gathered guests, honeymooners and families from around the world, watched in delighted silence as Patrick dropped to one knee in the soft sand. "I know we're already married," he said, pulling out a ring that caught the last rays of sunset. "And I know I already asked you to marry me again. But here, in this paradise, I want to give you the proposal you always deserved. Jalisa Montgomery, will you continue to choose me every day for the rest of our lives?" The ring was a black pearl, perfectly round and gleaming with subtle iridescence. Later, Patrick would tell her how he'd worked with locals, artisans, to find the perfect one, a pearl that, like Jalisa herself, was uniquely beautiful and naturally precious. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I choose you. Every day, in every way, I choose you." Patrick's kiss tasted of salt air and freedom, of promises made and kept, of love that had grown wild and true in the most unexpected garden. The assembled guests burst into applause, their joy adding to the magic of the moment. Later that night, after a celebration dinner on the beach, they lay on lounges on their private deck. The stars seemed close enough to touch, their reflection in the still water creating the illusion of floating in space. "Tell me what you're thinking," Patrick said softly, his fingers intertwined with hers. Jalisa was quiet for a moment, finding the right words. "I'm thinking about that day in the courthouse. How scared I was. How certain that my life was over. I never imagined—" "Neither did I," Patrick admitted. "I went into that courthouse determined to protect you, to give you a safe space to exist. I never dreamed you'd completely transform my world." She turned to look at him, this man who had become so much more than an arranged husband. "How did you know?" "That day. How did you know to trust that something real could grow from such an artificial beginning?" Patrick's smile was thoughtful in the starlight. "I didn't know. I just knew I had to try. You walked into that courthouse with your head high, dignity intact despite everything Victoria had done to break you. How could I not want to know the woman who had that kind of strength?" The next day, they went on a sunset cruise. The traditional Maldivian dhoni carried them through waters painted gold by the setting sun. Schools of dolphins played in their wake, leaping and spinning as if celebrating with them. Patrick had arranged for local musicians to be on board. The sound of traditional Bodubaru drums filled the air as they shared a meal of freshly caught fish and tropical delicacies. "Dance with me." Patrick held out his hand as the musicians shifted to a slower rhythm. They swayed together on the gently rocking deck, the music and the waves creating a perfect harmony. Jalisa rested her head on Patrick's chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady against her cheek. "I used to dream about this," she admitted quietly. "Not the specific details, but this feeling. Being held by someone who really sees me, really knows me." Patrick's arms tightened around her. "I see you, Jalisa Montgomery. I see your strength and your gentleness, your intelligence and your compassion. I see the way you light up a room just by entering it, the way you make everyone around you want to be better." As if to prove his point, he spun her out and then back into his arms, making her laugh with delight. The other passengers on the dhoni smiled at their obvious joy, their obvious love. "May I say something?" An elderly woman approached them as the dance ended. "I've been married 52 years, and I recognize true love when I see it. Whatever brought you two together, it was fate doing its finest work." That night, back in their villa, Patrick surprised Jalisa with another gift, a journal bound in soft leather, its pages made from handmade paper. "For your dreams," he explained. "All the ones Victoria tried to steal, all the new ones we'll create together. I want you to fill these pages with everything you hope for, everything you want to achieve, and I promise to spend the rest of my life helping make those dreams come true." Jalisa traced the intricate patterns tooled into the leather, thinking about how far she'd come from the frightened girl in that simple white dress. "I already have so many of my dreams," she said softly. "You've helped me reclaim them all, and find new ones I never dared to imagine." Their remaining days in the Maldives passed in a blur of perfect moments. They learned to cook traditional Maldivian dishes, the spices and flavors as rich as their growing love. They planted coral as part of the resort's conservation program, a symbol of new life taking root in unexpected places. They watched sunrise paint the sky from their private infinity pool, and sunset turn the ocean to gold from their favorite spot on the beach. On their last evening, Patrick organized a surprise. He led Jalisa down to the beach where hundreds of tiny lights created a path through the sand. At the end of the illuminated trail, a table had been set for two, surrounded by lanterns that swayed gently in the warm breeze. "One last perfect dinner," he said, holding her chair, "though every dinner with you is perfect no matter where we are." Over dishes that incorporated all their favorite discoveries from their stay, they talked about returning home, about the life they would continue building together, about the dreams they would chase, about the love that had bloomed so unexpectedly from an arranged marriage. "I want you to know," Patrick said as they shared a dessert of caramelized banana with coconut ice cream, "that this isn't just a honeymoon for me. This is a promise that our life together will always have this much joy, this much discovery, this much love." Jalisa reached across the table to take his hand. "Victoria used to tell me that love like this didn't exist, that it was just stories in books, that real marriages were about power and position." "Victoria," Patrick said firmly, "never experienced real love. She couldn't destroy your belief in it because she never understood it herself." Later, as they walked along the beach one last time, the stars reflecting in the calm water, Jalisa stopped to look out over the ocean. The warm breeze carried the scent of tropical flowers, and somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called. "I love you," she said simply. not because of arrangements or obligations or even gratitude. I love you because you're you, because you saw me when I was invisible, believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself, and loved me until I remembered how to soar. Patrick's kiss tasted of freedom and future, of promises kept and dreams unleashed. In the Maldivian paradise, far from the shadows of their past, they had found something rare and precious, a love that transformed an arrangement into destiny, a business deal into a true marriage of hearts. As they walked back to their villa hand in hand, the moon casting their shadows long across the sand, both knew that this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning of adventures yet to come, of dreams yet to be dreamed, of a love that would continue to grow and deepen with each passing day. Their hearts, once bound by others' schemes, had been unleashed to fly together, free and strong and true. Chapter 9. Empire of Two. Together, they began reshaping Montgomery Industries into something revolutionary. Fresh from their honeymoon and stronger than ever in their partnership, Patrick and Jalisa approached the company's transformation with shared vision and complementary strengths. Patrick's business acumen, combined with Jalisa's fresh perspective, created something unprecedented in the corporate world. They launched initiatives supporting education for underprivileged youth, remembering their own struggles and triumphs. The Montgomery Foundation, under Jalisa's guidance, became a model for corporate philanthropy that other companies scrambled to emulate. One crisp autumn morning, they sat together in Patrick's office, reviewing plans for their latest project, a technology education center in an underserved neighborhood. "The local community leaders have some concerns about gentrification," Jalisa said, spreading out the feedback reports across Patrick's desk. "They want assurance that this will benefit existing residents, not push them out." Patrick nodded, studying the documents thoughtfully. "Valid concerns. What do you suggest?" "A binding community benefits agreement," Jalisa replied, pulling out a draft she'd prepared. "Local hiring requirements, subsidized training programs, and a commitment to maintain affordable housing in the area. Plus, I think we should put community representatives on the center's board, give them real voice in decisions that affect their neighborhood." Patrick's smile was full of pride. "This is why we need your perspective at every level. You see beyond the business metrics to the human impact." The transformation of Montgomery Industries wasn't just about charitable initiatives. Under their joint leadership, the company began integrating ethical business practices into every aspect of operations. They raised minimum wages across all divisions, implemented comprehensive family leave policies, and created mentorship programs for employees from underrepresented backgrounds. Harrison Sr. watched from his semi-retirement with a mixture of surprise and grudging respect as the company's reputation and profits soared under their guidance. The press began calling Montgomery Industries the new face of corporate responsibility. One evening, after a particularly successful board meeting where Jalisa had presented their latest quarterly results, Harrison Sr. lingered behind as the other directors filed out. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of humility. "A moment?" Jalisa exchanged a glance with Patrick, who squeezed her hand supportively before stepping out to give them privacy. "I owe you an apology," Harrison Sr. said once they were alone. "When I arranged your marriage to Patrick, I saw you as an asset to be acquired. A way to help James out of his financial troubles while gaining some positive press about diversity in our corporate family." Jalisa remained quiet, letting him continue. "I was wrong," he admitted. "Not just about you, but about what makes a suitable wife, a suitable leader. You've brought something to this company that money can't buy, genuine vision for positive change." "Perhaps," Jalisa said carefully, "we should stop thinking in terms of what makes a suitable wife altogether. Maybe it's time to focus on recognizing and supporting human potential. regardless of how it's packaged. Harrison Sr.'s laugh held a touch of wonder. You sound exactly like your mother used to sound in board meetings. Jaleesa's head snapped up. What? Grace Vaughan served on Vaughn-Tech's board before James took over as CEO, Harrison explained. She was passionate about corporate responsibility, about using business as a force for good. Victoria made sure those records disappeared, of course, but seeing you in action, it's like watching Grace's spirit rise again. Tears pricked at Jaleesa's eyes as she absorbed this new piece of her mother's legacy. Patrick found her later in their private office, looking through old business journals she'd digitized. Found it, she said, as he entered, turning her tablet to show him a photograph. Grace Vaughan stood at a podium, addressing what appeared to be a shareholders' meeting. The caption read, Vaughn-Tech board member advocates for corporate social responsibility. She was amazing, Patrick said softly, studying the image, just like her daughter. Together, they continued building on Grace's legacy, pushing Montgomery Industries toward ever greater heights of ethical business practice. They launched a healthcare initiative that provided free medical care to underserved communities, naming the flagship clinic after Grace. Their partnership extended beyond the boardroom. Every evening, they made time to discuss their days, sharing challenges and celebrating victories. Patrick never failed to credit Jaleesa's contributions in public, making it clear that she was his equal in every way. One particularly challenging day, after dealing with resistance from old guard executives about their latest social initiative, they retreated to their favorite spot in the estate's gardens. Sometimes I wonder, Jaleesa admitted, if we're trying to change too much too fast. Patrick pulled her close, his arms strong and reassuring around her. Change is always met with resistance, but look at what we've already accomplished. The education centers are changing lives. The healthcare initiative is saving them. We're building something that matters. He was right. Their impact was evident in the thank you letters that poured in from scholarship recipients, in the success stories from their job training programs, in the improved lives of their employees and their families. Harrison Sr., watching his son and daughter-in-law reshape his company into something he'd never imagined, found himself learning new lessons at 73. Perhaps, he admitted to Patrick during a rare father-son lunch, I was wrong about what makes a suitable wife. You were wrong about a lot of things, Father, Patrick replied, his tone gentle but firm. But there's still time to learn. The old man nodded, looking out over the Manhattan skyline from their private dining room. She would have changed things anyway, you know, even without the arrangement. Talent like hers finds its way to the top eventually. Yes, Patrick agreed, thinking of his brilliant wife. But this way, we got to build something together, something bigger than either of us could have created alone. Their influence began extending beyond Montgomery Industries. Other companies sought their advice on ethical business practices. Universities invited them to speak about corporate responsibility. The press dubbed them the conscience of Wall Street, a title that made them both laugh but secretly pleased them. One evening, after a particularly impactful day where they'd announced a major expansion of their education initiative, they stood together on their office balcony. The sunset painted Manhattan in shades of gold and rose, a fitting backdrop for what they'd built together. Did you ever imagine this? Jaleesa asked, leaning back against Patrick's chest as they watched the city lights begin to twinkle. That night when you first walked into that bedroom at the estate? Patrick's arms tightened around her. No, he admitted. I imagined protecting you, giving you space to heal and grow. I never dreamed you'd become not just my wife, but my partner in everything, that together we'd build something this meaningful. Jaleesa turned in his embrace, reaching up to trace the beloved lines of his face. You gave me more than protection. You gave me the confidence to become who I was always meant to be." "You did that yourself," Patrick corrected gently. "I just had the privilege of watching you soar." Their kiss was sweet with the taste of shared triumph, of dreams realized and new ones taking shape. Below them, the city hummed with life, lives they were helping to improve, communities they were helping to strengthen, futures they were helping to building. They had created more than just a successful company. They had built an empire of positive change, a legacy of compassion and innovation that would outlast them both. And they had done it together, turning an arranged marriage into a partnership that transformed not just their own lives, but countless others. As the last rays of sunset gilded the city in gold, Jalisa and Patrick Montgomery stood wrapped in each other's arms, their hearts beating in perfect sync. They were more than husband and wife, more than business partners. They were architects of change, builders of dreams, proof that love could not only heal the past, but reshape the future. Their empire of two had become a force for good in the world, and they were only just beginning. Sweet Revenge, a love story. Chapter 10. A new dawn, Santorini emerged from the morning mist like a dream, its whitewashed buildings catching the first rays of dawn. The wedding venue Patrick had chosen was breathtaking, an ancient monastery perched on the highest cliff, offering panoramic views of the caldera and endless Aegean Sea. "Perfect," Jalisa whispered, standing on her private balcony the morning of their wedding. The air was fragrant with jasmine and sea salt, carrying the distant chime of church bells across the water. 1,000 guests would witness their union today. Not because they craved a society spectacle, but because their love story had touched so many lives. Business leaders who'd seen how Patrick and Jalisa transformed Montgomery Industries into a force for good. Scholarship recipients whose lives they'd changed. Community members who'd benefited from their initiatives. In her bridal suite, Jalisa prepared with help from both her old and new family. Mrs. Chen fussed with her veil while dabbing happy tears. The wedding dress was a masterpiece, a fusion of cultures that honored both her African heritage and her modern life. Delicate beadwork told stories of strength and survival in patterns that echoed both traditional African designs and Greek motifs. "You look exactly like your mother," James said when he entered, his voice thick with emotion. He carried a small blue velvet box. "Grace wore these pearls at our wedding. She always said they were blessed with true love." As he fastened the pearl necklace, James spoke words he'd waited years to say. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Sorry I let Victoria poison our family. Sorry I wasn't strong enough to protect you. But look at the amazing woman you've become despite everything. Your mother would be so proud. We're building something new now, Dad," Jalisa replied, squeezing his hand. "That's what matters." Patrick had arranged for the ceremony to blend their cultures seamlessly. Traditional Greek Orthodox elements merged with African customs in a celebration of unity rather than conformity. The ancient monastery's stone walls were draped with both white roses and vibrant African flowers. Musicians played a fusion of Greek and African melodies that somehow created perfect harmony. When the doors opened and Jalisa appeared on James's arm, the collective gasp from the guests echoed off the stone walls. She was radiant, not just beautiful, but luminous with joy and strength. Patrick, waiting at the altar, felt tears spring to his eyes at the sight of the woman who had transformed his life. Their vows were both personal and profound. Patrick spoke first, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Jalisa, I first married you because of an arrangement, determined to protect you from those who would cause you harm. Today, I marry you again under this endless sky because you have become the very air I breathe. You've shown me that true strength lies not in power or control, but in the courage to remain kind in a cruel world. You've transformed not just my life, but my entire understanding of what love can accomplish." He paused, taking her hands in his before continuing. I choose you, not because of any arrangement or obligation, but because you are the most extraordinary soul I've ever known. I promise to spend every day making sure you never regret choosing me too. Together, we'll build something greater than either of us could create alone. A legacy of love that will outlive us both. Jalisa's vows brought tears to every eye. Patrick, you took an arrangement meant to cage me and turned it into wings. You saw me when I was invisible, believed in me when I'd forgotten how to believe in myself, and loved me until I remembered how to soar. Today, I choose you again, not from obligation, but from the deepest love I've ever known. You are my partner in all things, my sanctuary in every storm, my inspiration to be better every day. She touched his face gently as she continued. You didn't just save me from a dark fate, you helped me build a life filled with light. I promise to keep choosing you, keep growing with you, keep building our dreams together for all the days of our life. In you, I've found not just love, but the kind of partnership that can change the world. The ceremony incorporated meaningful elements from both their backgrounds. During the Greek Orthodox crowning ritual, where Stefana joined by ribbons symbolized their union, the priest spoke of how true marriage makes partners stronger together than apart. The African hand-fasting used kente cloth, whose patterns told stories of triumph over adversity. When Patrick kissed his bride, the applause shook the ancient stones. As if nature herself blessed their union, dolphins leapt in the waters below, and white doves soared overhead. The reception was a spectacular celebration of love's power to transform. Tables draped in white and gold stretched along the cliff's edge under canopies of twinkling lights. The menu featured both Greek and African dishes, each course telling part of their story. Harrison Senior's toast surprised everyone with its emotion. When I arranged this marriage, I thought I was making a business decision. Instead, I witnessed a miracle, two extraordinary people finding their way to true love despite my interference. Jalisa, you haven't just made my son happy. You've made our company better, our family stronger, and our world a little brighter. I am honored to call you my daughter. James's speech brought fresh tears. To watch my daughter find this kind of love, to see her become the amazing woman her mother always knew she would be, it's more than a father could hope for. Patrick, you didn't just love Jalisa, you helped her remember who she was always meant to be. Grace would be so proud of you both. As night fell, Patrick pulled Jalisa aside to a private balcony. Behind them, the celebration continued in full swing. Before them, the sun set in a spectacular display of color over the Aegean. Dance with me, he asked softly, pulling her into his arms as music drifted up from below. Always, she smiled, resting her head on his chest as they swayed together. I have something for you, Patrick said after a moment, producing a small velvet box. Inside was an ancient Greek coin fashioned into a pendant, surrounded by diamonds. The coin symbolizes Aphrodite, goddess of love and transformation. The museum curator said it was found right here in Santorini, buried in the ruins of a temple. It survived earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, getting stronger and more precious with time. Like us, Jalisa whispered as he fastened it around her neck. Like us, he agreed. We started from an arrangement, but we've forged something unbreakable. Every challenge has only made our love stronger. Their kiss was sweet, with triumph and promise. Below them, the celebration continued, 1,000 witnesses to love's power to transform lives. Above them, stars began to appear in the deepening dusk. Happy? Patrick asked softly. More than I ever dreamed possible, Jalisa replied. Thank you for giving me not just safety, but wings to fly. Thank you for teaching me what real love looks like, he answered. For showing me that true power lies in lifting others up, not holding them down. They danced until dawn, surrounded by joy and celebration. When the first light touched the eastern sky, painting their world in shades of hope and promise, they stood together at the cliff's edge. "A new dawn," Patrick said softly, his arms warm around his wife. "A new beginning," Jalisa agreed, though they both knew this was really a continuation of their love, their partnership, their shared vision for making the world better. Their second wedding hadn't been about erasing their first. Rather, it had been about celebrating how far they'd come, how much they'd grown, how deeply they'd chosen each other. From an arranged marriage had bloomed something rare and precious, a love strong enough to heal the past and build a better future. As the sun rose fully over the Aegean, painting their world in colors of promise and possibility, Patrick and Jalisa Montgomery held each other close, their hearts beating in perfect synchrony. They had proved that love could grow in the most unexpected places, that arranged beginnings could lead to chosen happiness, that two people could build something extraordinary from the ashes of their past. Their story had become legend in New York society, not for its scandal or wealth, but for its testament to love's power to transform, heal, and lift two souls to heights they never imagined possible, and they were only just beginning. Chapter 11. Justice and Mercy. Victoria's trial ended with a lengthy prison sentence that surprised no one who knew the extent of her crimes. The evidence Patrick's investigators had uncovered was overwhelming. Years of systematic fraud, embezzlement and financial manipulation that had nearly destroyed Vaughn-Tech. The prosecution had built an airtight case, presenting not just financial records, but testimony from employees who had witnessed Victoria's manipulation firsthand. The jury had been particularly moved by the testimony of James's former secretary, who described watching helplessly as Victoria isolated him from his daughter and his company. "She was like a spider," the secretary testified, her voice trembling but clear, "spinning webs of lies and control, making everyone doubt themselves until they were too tangled to see the truth." The sentencing hearing was held on a cold December morning. Jalisa sat between Patrick and James in the courtroom, watching as Victoria was led in, wearing a prison jumpsuit that looked bizarre against her perfectly styled hair and manicured nails. Victoria's lawyer had tried to paint her as a misunderstood businesswoman, someone who had perhaps been overzealous in protecting her family's interests. But the evidence told a different story, of calculated cruelty, of systematic theft, of a woman who had used grief and manipulation to build her own empire of control. The judge's words were damning. "Mrs. Rothschild Vaughan, you have shown no remorse for your actions. The systematic way you exploited your position, both in the company and in your family, shows a level of calculation that this court finds particularly disturbing. Your actions weren't just financially damaging, they were emotionally devastating to those who trusted you." Victoria's face remained impassive as the sentence was read, 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 10. Only when the guards moved to lead her away did her mask crack slightly, her eyes seeking out Jalisa with a mixture of hatred and something else, perhaps finally fear. A week after the sentencing, Jalisa received a letter from Victoria's prison. Patrick found her staring at the unopened envelope in their sitting room. "You don't have to read it," he said gently, sitting beside her. "No one would blame you for throwing it away." But Jalisa knew she needed this closure. With steady hands, she opened the letter to find Victoria's precise handwriting, somehow still elegant even on prison stationery. "Dear Jalisa, I suppose you're celebrating your victory now. You've taken everything I built, turned James against me, made yourself the perfect Montgomery wife I always said you couldn't be. I still remember the day you came to live with us, a scared little girl clutching that ridiculous photo of your mother. I saw then what a threat you could be, with your gentle heart so like Grace's, your quiet intelligence that reminded everyone of what they'd lost. Perhaps that's why I worked so hard to dim your light. It was too bright, too pure, too much like your mother's. She had that same way of making people love her without even trying. I won't ask for forgiveness. We both know I don't deserve it. But I want you to understand, everything I did was to survive in a world that had no place for women like me. Unlike you and Grace, I had to fight for every scrap of power, every moment of control. Yours truly, Victoria. Jalisa read the letter twice, feeling something shift in her heart. The next day she made arrangements to visit Victoria in prison. Patrick insisted on driving her himself. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as they pulled up to the Federal Correctional Facility. "You don't owe her anything." "I'm not doing it for her," Jalisa replied softly. "I'm doing it for me." The prison visiting room was stark and institutional, nothing like Victoria's carefully curated environments. She sat at one of the metal tables, stripped of her designer clothes and social status, looking small and bitter in her standard-issue uniform. "Well," Victoria said as Jalisa sat across from her, "come to gloat?" "No," Jalisa replied calmly. "I came to forgive you." Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "What?" "I forgive you," Jalisa repeated. "Not for you, but for me. I'm free now, from your manipulation, from your cruelty, from the cage you tried to build around my heart. Holding on to anger would only keep me connected to that cage." "You sound just like her," Victoria whispered, and for the first time there was no mockery in her voice when she referenced Grace. "Your mother always said forgiveness was strength, not weakness. I never understood that." "You never tried to understand anything about love or compassion," Jalisa said gently. "You were too busy building walls to protect yourself." Victoria's laugh was bitter. "And look where those walls got me." "It's not too late," Jalisa found herself saying. "Even here, you could choose to be different, to help others instead of hurting them. Like your precious Montgomery Foundation." Victoria's sneer was automatic, but it lacked its usual force. "Playing Lady Bountiful with other people's money?" "No," Jalisa replied steadily. "Like my mother, who found ways to help people even when she had nothing but kindness to give. The prison has programs, teaching, mentoring, rehabilitation. You have skills that could help other women rebuild their lives." Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or a ghost of possibility. But her mask slipped back into place quickly. "You always were an idealist, just like Grace." "Yes," Jalisa agreed, standing. "I am like my mother. And that's not an insult anymore, Victoria. It's my greatest strength." She left the prison walking taller, Patrick waiting to take her home. That night she told him she was pregnant. The news spilled out as they sat in their favorite spot in the garden, the late autumn air crisp around them. Patrick's face transformed with joy as he gathered her close. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." Their joy echoed through the halls of their home like music. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears when they told her, immediately starting to plan nursery arrangements. Harrison Sr. actually hugged Jalisa, his usual reserve cracking at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. James, when they shared the news over family dinner, looked at his daughter with eyes full of love and hope. "Your mother would be so proud," he said softly, "of everything you've become, of the family you're building." That night, as they lay in bed together, Patrick's hand resting protectively over Jalisa's still flat stomach, she thought about cycles breaking and new beginnings. "Our child will never know the kind of pain we knew," Patrick promised, as if reading her thoughts. "They'll be surrounded by love from the start." "Yes," Jalisa agreed, thinking of her mother's legacy of kindness, of the strength she'd found in forgiveness, of the love she and Patrick had built from the ashes of their arranged beginning. They'll know nothing but love. The future stretched before them like a dawn-lit path, bright with promise and possibility. They had faced their demons, healed their wounds, and emerged stronger together. Now they were creating something new, a family built on choice and love and understanding. Victoria's sentencing had closed one chapter, but Jalisa's forgiveness had opened another. As she drifted off to sleep in Patrick's arms, their child growing beneath his gentle hand, she felt truly, completely free. The cycle of pain had been broken. Justice had been served, mercy had been offered, and love had triumphed over all. Their baby would be born into a world of healing and hope, carrying forward a legacy not of bitterness and control, but of compassion and strength, just as Grace would have wanted. Chapter 12. Triumph of Love. 1 month after Victoria's trial and their joyous pregnancy news, Patrick and Jalisa stood together before 1,000 guests in the grandest ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. Tonight wasn't just any celebration. It was their moment to show the world that love could triumph over any darkness. The ballroom had been transformed into a wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over tables draped in silk, while cascading flowers in shades of white and gold created an enchanted garden effect. Every detail spoke of rebirth and triumph, from the delicate butterfly motifs worked into the place settings to the wall of roses bearing messages of love and hope from those whose lives they'd touched. Jalisa was radiant in a custom gown that celebrated both her early pregnancy and her victory over the past. The designer had created something magnificent, flowing ivory silk that made her look like a goddess of victory, with subtle beading that caught the light like stars. "Ready?" Patrick asked softly, squeezing her hand as they prepared to make their entrance. "With you?" "Always," she replied, touching the new locket he'd given her that morning, one side holding her mother's picture, the other their first ultrasound image. The doors opened, and they entered to thunderous applause. The guest list read like a who's who of New York society, but more importantly, it included people whose lives they'd touched. Scholarship recipients, employees, families they'd helped through their foundation work. Patrick's voice carried clearly as they took the stage. "Many of you were at that charity gala months ago when the truth about Victoria came to light. Tonight, we're here to celebrate not just justice being served, but love triumphing over hatred, truth defeating lies, and light overcoming darkness." Jalisa stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. "A year ago, I stood in a courthouse, entering an arranged marriage I thought would be my prison. Instead, it became the beginning of the greatest love story I could imagine. Tonight, as we celebrate not just our love, but the child we're expecting, I want to announce something special." Together, they unveiled their surprise. Plans for the Grace Vaughan Memorial Hospital, a state-of-the-art facility that would provide care to underprivileged children. The architectural renderings showed a beautiful building designed to heal not just bodies, but spirits. "My mother," Jalisa continued, her hand resting on her small baby bump, "taught me that true strength lies in kindness. This hospital will be her legacy, and the world our child will inherit." James stood to make his own announcement, his voice steady and strong. "In honor of my late wife Grace and my coming grandchild, I am dedicating Vaughan Tech's entire medical technology division to supporting this initiative. It's time to honor Grace's memory the way she would have wanted, by helping others." Even Harrison Sr. had a surprise. The man who had once arranged their marriage for business purposes now stood with tears in his eyes. "Montgomery Industries will match every donation made tonight. It's time to show that true power lies not in control, but in giving back." The dancing began. But the most powerful moment came when Patrick led Jalisa to the center of the floor. The orchestra began playing At Last, their song since that first night when he'd ordered chocolate cake instead of demanding his marital rights. "May I have everyone's attention?" Patrick's voice carried across the ballroom. "A year ago, I married this extraordinary woman because of an arrangement. Tonight, I want the world to know that I choose her every day with all my heart. Jalisa, you've transformed not just my life, but my entire understanding of what love can achieve." His hand rested gently on her belly as he continued, "Now, as we prepare to welcome our child, I want to make a new vow before all these witnesses. I promise to spend every day showing our baby what real love looks like. Not love arranged by others, but love chosen freely, love that builds and heals and transforms." Jalisa's eyes shimmered with tears as she replied, "And I choose you, every day, in every way. Our child will grow up knowing that true strength lies not in power or control, but in the courage to love without limits." Their kiss drew applause that shook the crystal chandeliers. But it was the quiet moment afterward, as they swayed together on the dance floor, that truly captured their journey, from arranged marriage to soulmates, from business transaction to love that could change the world. Later that night, they stood on their favorite balcony overlooking the city. The hospital site was visible in the distance, its foundation already taking shape. "Did you ever imagine this?" Patrick asked, his arms wrapped around his wife, their baby safe between them. "That night in the courthouse, did you ever dream we'd build something this extraordinary?" "No," Jalisa smiled, leaning back against his chest. "I imagined survival. You taught me to imagine happiness instead. And now—" She placed his hand over their growing child. "Now we're creating a legacy of love that will outlive us both." Their kiss was sweet with the taste of triumph, of dreams realized and new ones taking shape. Below them, the city stretched out like a sea of stars, each light representing a life they might touch through their work, their love, their example. The arranged marriage that was meant to cage them had instead given them wings. Together, they had built something extraordinary, a love story that would inspire generations, a legacy that would help thousands, and a partnership that proved sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the most unexpected beginnings. As they held each other under the stars, their baby moving gently between them, both knew that this wasn't really an ending at all. It was the beginning of their greatest adventure, one they would face together, stronger for every challenge they'd overcome, richer for every dream they'd dared to chase. The end. Subscribe if you loved.